So, firstly, I'm Maddie from the Network One, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this webinar today. It's a really interesting session on a really important topic, um, one that's quite often overlooked. So, with it being Men's Health Month as well, men's mental health, we'll be exploring why so many men feel disconnected and how masculinity is being redefined. So today's format will have 5 minutes of introduction, a 35-minute presentation, and hopefully a 15-minute Q&A session, and be wrapped up by 2 p.m. BST. And feel free to submit a question in any time, and we'll pick them out at the end. Either message me privately or you can message in the webinar chat. Okay, so without further ado, I'd love to introduce John and Fernando, and I'll let them tell you a bit more about their backgrounds and what's brought them here today. So, John, shall we start with you?
Hi, yes, thank you very much, and welcome everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk on this subject, which is very dear to my heart. So I'm John Sealey, and I'm the founder of the Thriving Men organization. Now, I worked in the communications business in various senior roles in advertising, on the agency side, marketing on the client side, and also as a consultant for more years than I care to remember, to be honest with you. And for me, it was very normal for a very long time to be working, 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, maybe even sometimes 80 hours a week. And I just thought that was what you did. That was the badge of honor that you wore if you were in this industry, and it was the price you paid. And even though I was outwardly successful, or successful enough, I was ignoring the fact that on the inside, I was actually increasingly running on empty. And I ignored all the warning signs. I just kind of thought, stiff upper lip, you just keep going, all will be well in the end, whenever the end is. Typical male reaction, to be honest with you. And it was only when I had a really huge burnout a couple of years ago, which knocked me out for 6 months, and other serious health challenges that accompanied that, that I decided I had to really slam on the emergency brake and do something different with my time. So after much thought and deliberation, that's when I actually had the idea of the Thriving Men organization. And as it sounds in the title, I was thinking, well, I'm not the only one that this affects. I'm not the only one who's been through this situation. How do we get men back to being thriving men? How do we create a space, a community, an organization that's supplying courses, support, tools that can really help guys, busy guys, to recalibrate and reset so that they can actually regain some equilibrium in their lives. So that's where the idea came from. My idea was, we're ambitious. By all means, be ambitious. By all means, want to be successful. But how do we get to a more sustainable, holistic performance where we have strong mental resilience, where we don't compromise on our health and well-being, and also where we're decent people. We don't create toxic environments in the places we work in and also at home. So that's where I come from. And when I started, I thought I would be targeting sort of guys in their 40s and 50s. The reality of what I'm experiencing in the time I've been doing this so far is that actually the youngest people I've been working with are still in their 20s. And it goes right up to people in their 70s. So this is really clearly an issue that is affecting, actually different generations of men. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks, John. Passing over to Fernando.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being there. My name is Fernando Desouches. I am Managing Director of New Macho at BBD Perfect Storm. New Macho is a male marketing specialist, part of BBD Perfect Storm, that is an independent agency based in London. So we are a brand and cultural transformation company, and New Macho is one of the strategic units we have. The way I get into this, and I want to explain what New Macho does, that is what we do is we help brand growth and an institution through a new positive main narrative. And we work with many brands from Heinz, PepsiCo, Unilever, Beiersdorf, UN, and many others. The way I started doing that at BBD Perfect Storm was before joining Perfect Storm, I worked for Unilever, and I worked most of my career for the Axe and Links brand, and like 9 years in Latin America and in global, and then also worked for Damian Plus Care and so on. And while we were working on the repositioning of the Links campaign, the Axe campaign, we did a huge research in 10 countries, talking to 3,500 guys. And one of the insights coming out from that was a slide saying men are performing the masculinity instead of living it. And this is 2013. And it really hit me first, saying, okay, this rings a bell. I think I am part of that. And then I started looking at the sites and said, okay, I think all of men that I know maybe are really doing that. They are performing who they are. They are not just being who they are. They are acting out. And eventually that was the cornerstone that started to change the Axe brand at the moment. That it was, I think, the call for the moment. But then also changed my life in parallel. And eventually I left Unilever to do more of this. I met Jason, the CEO for Perfect Storm, and he said, this is something that we can do. It's very purposeful. It has an impact in the business. So we launched in the agency together New Macho. And since then, this was 7 years ago, really the message is growing. We are not just working with brands, we work with institutions. So we work with the UN. I am part of the board member. I am a board member of Equimundo. That is a very big organization for masculinities and social justice in the US and global. Global Boyhood Initiative as well. We are part of the Stereotype Alliance. And also we try to drive the discussion as we are doing now at the Network One. We do that in Cannes, UN Advertising Week, campaign, drum, and other publications. So thanks for having me. I'm looking forward for this conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you both. So to start things off, I'm going to share a video from a Movember campaign, which was recently launched. So bear with me as I just share my screen.
I got a masculinity map and it said, this is what you need to do to be a man. As men, we're taught to be physically brave, but not emotionally brave.
I'm down, I have no energy to work, and I just went online.
And I was struggling with some stuff mentally and at home. I looked and really went down a rabbit hole.
My mentor became an online masculinity influencer. This person was like a father figure to me. They were offering me guidance and I desperately needed that. I did feel relief. I felt a sense of belonging, really clear answers. It felt like a lifeline at the time. I started to realize, oh my goodness, the online world had become my inner world. The version of masculinity that is being promoted online by the influencers, it's very prescriptive. It says, do these 3 things and you will get this. And it's very easy to digest. It's coming in quick form content.
Never sleep, never rest.
There's actually nothing wrong with wanting a girlfriend, going to the gym or building a business. But I was relying on those things for self-worth. And it was a very fragile way of existing. We're following these influencers, but where are they taking us?
Brilliant. So I think that video really brings into sharp focus why we're all here today, and leads me to my first question. Where are we at right now with men in society, culturally, and looking inwards as well? So I'm going to start with you here, John, for you to answer this first question.
Great, thank you very much. What's very interesting, I think we see films like that and we think this issue of these masculinity influences is a young men's issue or a young men's problem. But I think when we look at this question, how are we doing with men right now? Many men, even older men, don't feel that they're really part of the central dialogue, the cultural dialogue of what's going on in many societies. A UK YouGov poll from 2023, which was actually talking from 25 to 49-year-olds. So that's kind of the age group after the group in this video we just watched. Over half of these guys were also saying that they didn't believe that they and their issues were being taken seriously by the media, by government, by institutions, by organizations, companies, etc. And that there was too much emphasis on what men were doing wrong, and they were all being tarred with the same brush, and very little discussion about what support they actually needed to move forward. The quote was, "I feel like I'm a problem waiting to be fixed." I think expectations have changed, but the guidance around it hasn't really caught up. So men are expected, of course, to be these days more open, more emotionally aware, more communicative, more reflective, etc. But they're also still supposed to hold it together, perform, to lead, to act like men. And where there's a gap is really, where is the real world guidance on how to do both of these different things successfully? And when you look at the cultural norms that certainly in Europe and North America, Australia, but even in fact, if you look at Russia and places like that, we come from a different set of cultural influences, and it's challenging who we are and how we show up in the world. And I think this is the problem, which is exactly why, if you can't find an answer anywhere else, also older men are looking online to these masculinity influences. They may or may not be as open to influence as some of the younger guys, but there's certainly a challenge there. It's certainly often not helpful in the long run. And I think the biggest issue, and I didn't say this in the introduction, but I'm actually a coach and hypnotherapist. So by the way, in my own burnout, I should have known better, shouldn't I? But my excuse is I wasn't doing that profession at the time. And you never look in the mirror and really see yourself. But anyway, as a coach and a therapist, a hypnotherapist, what I can say is that I think we lack the correct entry points that we need to actually meet men where they're at right now, as opposed to where we'd like them to be when we start offering them coaching, counseling, or therapy. So, the most common therapy types like talk therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy are all very well, but for guys who aren't used to talking about their feelings, or that very articulate young man in the video, the worst thing you can do is kind of sit somebody down on a chair, put a spotlight on them and say, now talk. That's not what men are about. It's a bridge too far. Interesting stats from the US say that men are only half as likely as women to get help when they're feeling stress or pressure. I think most men will actually respond to support that's framed in terms of like resilience, performance, recalibrating, taking back control. My experience is the methods of delivery that work, but which we don't seem to kind of institutionalize in our health systems sufficiently, is where men can actually take action, perhaps ahead of talking about themselves. So apps, online tools, gamification, self-checks, semi-anonymous communities where they can be part of a community, but they don't actually kind of do an emotional striptease if they don't want to, but they can see what other people are saying. They can see what their peer group is saying. And even hybrid solutions, quite often when I'm working with people, I will give them forms to fill in, online forms, even things where they get sort of like point systems and stuff. So that when we start talking about their issues, we're not talking just face to face, we're talking about the results of that test or, you know, that survey that you completed, because it makes it easier than that sort of confrontational talk that a lot of people don't really react well to, respond well to straight away. Quite apart from the alarming figures in terms of the detachment of men and also burnout and all the rest of it, we also have a very stark statistic, which is 70% of adult suicides are male adults. That's true for North America, that's true for Western Europe, that's true for Australia. And if you look at places like Eastern Europe and Russia and some other countries, you're even going as far as 80%. So there's a real issue there. So I really think we need new frameworks. We need to take away the stigma and taboo around men's mental health issues. And we really need to bring men in, to bring men in from the cold and help them reflect and change in a way that suits them. That's when we make real progress.
Thanks, John. I'd love to hear your point of view on this, Fernando. What are you seeing in the way men are behaving?
Yeah, I totally agree with John. I think, but I think men are aware. Men are aware where they are. They don't want to hear, of course, that they are in crisis. It's not that. They are in a transition. They are in a transition for this performing that we said before, the man doing to the man being. This is very well explained in a book called The Boy Crisis by Warren Farrell. But they feel invisible. I totally agree with John. So there's a Equimundo study saying that almost 2/3 of American men feel that young men feel that nobody knows them well, and half of them thinking that their life online are more fulfilling than the life online. What I think is interesting is that they are transitioning, but they got trapped and they are confused. This transition is not easy, it's not immediate, but in a test that we have done in the US and the UK, talking to 4,000 men, 18 to 75, we found it out that their aspirations has been changing for them. We did this test in 2023 after the pandemic. We asked them, okay, what makes us a successful man for you, maybe in the past and today? And say, well, in the past, I thought that success was about making money, having a glamorous lifestyle, being famous, having material things. But now I changed, they say. I think now, and this is all ages, I think that it's more about being happy day to day, having a good relationship with my friends and colleagues, do the work that serves others, and have a good health and well-being, and a partner that respect me and love me. So the thing is that they want to go there, but they got trapped, and we can talk more about the role of communications there. But there is a quote that explained that super well from a group that I've been to, a guy that says, we asked them, okay, would you like to do a more fulfillment career? And he said, yeah, I would love to do a more purposeful career for myself, but people still judge me for the car I drive. So the expectations are confusing. This is not just so social, no? It's like to get a partner, no? There's the great example that also Warren Farrell has in the books. He says, oh, Louisa Lane wants to make Superman vulnerable, approachable. She dreams with that, to see the vulnerable part of Superman. But she has on the side Clark Kent that is totally vulnerable, and she doesn't give a shit. So like, there is something there that we are giving signals that are not clear. We are not, as John said, going with men on the journey that they have to do for the benefit of all. This is not just for men, this is for everybody. We will not get a sustainable gender balance if we don't relax the concept of masculinity.
Absolutely. And I feel like there's definitely a tension between, old expectations and modern values, which really hit home for a lot of men. So that leads us naturally into our next question. What is the role of brands and what barriers exist? Fernando, I'll come to you first here.
Yeah, thanks for the question, because it's totally natural. The flow is like, so men are saying, okay, I want to change. Yeah, I'm ready. I'm there. I understand what's important for me. But then we ask them in the same survey, okay, and tell me how brand communication and the media are portraying what is success for men. And they go directly to the past. They say, no, when I see how men are portraying media in terms of what makes them successful, is based on how much money you have, the possessions you have, if you have a famous lifestyle and a glamorous lifestyle. And we asked them, okay, where the pressure points that you get from the media is coming from, and it came from the same spaces. When the media is telling you that if you want to be successful, you need to have these things. And it's not small things. So it's like we asked them, and it's 63% of Gen Z men, 66% of millennial men telling us that the way they are portrayed in the media and in the brand communications make them feel less successful than they are. So we are doing content that makes them men feel worse about themselves. So we have a role. Sorry, and this is what we do in marketing. We build culture, we build narrative. So if we are part of the problem, certainly we can be part of the solution.
Great. And we have a quick video here that I'll share my screen again.
Yeah, maybe I do an intro on that. So this is to make, so we prepare this internal, this is for internal use, but to make the point on how men see success. We did this in 2019, so it's quite old, but it's so relevant still today. That is how we are seeing, how men construct this definition of what makes a man successful.
Right.
How do men see success? Cars, bars, boats? No, not boats. Yachts. Lots and lots and lots of money, of honeys. Don't be funny. Being fast. Ferrari, Lamborghini, Martini. Shaken, not stirred. Never, ever stirred. Always tough. Triceps, biceps, pecs. Sex, lots and lots and lots of sex. Lots of success. Business, excess, careless, hairless, fearless, joyless, heartless, expressionless, humorless, relentless, emotionless, soulless success.
Every time I see that video, it gives me goosebumps. The end is so impactful. And I think that leads me on to asking you, John, how can we move beyond just, surface level representation for men, and how are men actually feeling when they see these brands, this advertisement? How do they respond?
I mean, first of all, I think it's a brilliant film, by the way, because it may be a few years old, but we haven't moved on in society that quickly that it's become irrelevant. If you told me the film had been from yesterday, I would have largely accepted that and said, yeah, absolutely. I think what's happening, these images are reinforcing the internal pressure that we feel to keep up. That despite the sort of the discourse, the dialogue that's going on, if you like, the warning shots that guys are saying that this doesn't really represent me, because they don't feel heard, because they don't feel that things are changing in the way that they maybe would like them to change, they keep going. And this is sustaining this kind of toxic motivation that a lot of these people are feeling. And toxic motivation is really a lot about external validation. It's about pain rather than purpose, even though they say they want meaningful lives. It's about perfectionism. It's about not showing weakness. It's always showing up. And I think, many high-performing men who would perhaps like to get out of the rat race or slow the hamster wheel at least down a little bit, they're still, they chase success, status, and validation, external validation, to compensate for the emotional and psychological depletion that they're feeling on the inside, and they're not actually getting sorted out, right? And when brands glorify this 24/7 pressure, this control, the unshakable confidence, all of this, they're actually adding fuel to the fire. And I think that's exactly the point about the end of that film, is that, you know, are brands failing men rather than actually making a positive contribution? And of course, this doesn't just impact individuals. This shapes workplace culture, mental health trends, how well people are actually, you know, how well they're doing in their family, in their personal relationships. Of course, it has impact throughout the whole thing. And I think, and I know Fernando is dealing with this on a daily basis, and I'm possibly not anymore. But how can brands start to help reconnect? I think brands need to ask themselves. Obviously, it depends what the brand is for and who their target group or their avatar is. But I think they need to ask questions like, what kind of man does our brand actually recognize? What kind of man does our brand stand for? What's going on in his life? You know, what pressures does he face? If we actually do that reality check, as opposed to the just sort of like the bullshit, the over aspirational BS, I think that's fine. But you know, where the roots? Where is this person grounded? And what kind of tools does he need? And as a brand, where can we realistically provide support? I think showing more relatable, grounded male role models as opposed to superhumans is also a point. I think there is a trend towards that. I think there's a trend towards that in the UK far more than, for example, in Germany, where I live. I don't see so much of that. And maybe offer, you know, be part of a debate around more balanced ambition, showing men going about their day, dealing with their stuff, dealing with their challenges, but they're also, you know, composed. They're also aware. They make smart decisions about their lives rather than just kind of like endlessly pushing through. So, you know, that's from a slightly more outside perspective these days. That's some of the things that I see and that I would wish to happen.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's about portraying honesty and reliability and helping men feel seen without being shamed. So this brings me to our final question. What do we actually do with all of this? How do we turn insight into action? So how can we actually support one another? You quickly touched on, you know, looking within the business itself, John. So how do we do that internally as well?
Well, I mean, you know, let's start on our own front doorstep. I mean, if we're talking about the whole communications business, whether it's if you like, the agency or supplier side, or it's the client side, the brand side. I know there are a lot of initiatives in place, but I think some of them only get paid lip service. I think, you know, I worked in this industry, and I was actually an observer. I was at the end, I was actually an advisor. I was a consultant in a fairly privileged position. That didn't stop me having a burnout either. And I think people who are on the, you know, really on the coal face on this, people working in agencies, etc. It's always going to be a tough call. It's always going to be a big challenge. But I think, you know, there's ample evidence, if we would just listen to it and pay attention to it. You know, you look at McKinsey, you look at Deloitte, some of their reports, Human Capital Report, etc. All these trends point to the benefits of people actually implementing ever more sort of emotionally intelligent leadership, being smart, being inclusive, as a way of increasing innovation, staff retention, collaboration, better team performance, less conflict, etc. So I think that really, and I'm realistic. You can't just do all of this at the flick of a switch overnight, but I think it's what we have to head towards. And I think there's a real key here. You know, DEI, which has been given a bad rap in some places, particularly more recently since the political change in the US, was an initiative that was largely introduced to counterbalance the excesses of male leadership, if we're perfectly honest. It's sort of the old way of doing things. But I think whatever it ends up being called, I think it actually has to be repurposed to include the men who are at the moment not in one of the special interest groups that gets the focus or attention within classic sort of DEI projects. And I think that's an issue that needs addressing. You know, it's not about making men soft, and it's certainly not about diluting or undermining the very necessary efforts that take place to support women and other special interest groups. But I think it is about finding ways that we can expand the range of behaviors and emotional articulation, is that a word? Ooh, emotional eloquence of men. I think that's very important. And so when we're talking with the language, I think is a very important thing here as well. If we actually want men to get on board, we can't talk about me time and talking about your feelings and self-care and healing and stuff. It doesn't work for a vast majority of men. But if you talk about sustainable performance, prioritizing health, developing mental resistance, making progress, there's ways around this that actually start to engage guys, and they actually start to commit to it more. I think also the management of agencies and the management of marketing companies have to truly commit. I mean, I was shocked for a number of reasons, but I was shocked when, after the election in the US, how quickly a whole bunch of very big companies threw their DEI initiatives overboard. They didn't just say, okay, maybe we need to revisit it. They just kind of said, oh, well, we don't need that. So where's the commitment, and how strong is that commitment also of management to actually helping men to become really, although it sounds a cliche, better versions of themselves, so that they're actually better people to work for and to work with all the, all the advantages and benefits that would bring with it. So that's basically where I'm coming from. I mean, and I have a saying with my Thriving Men organization. I think thriving men are the best allies of thriving women. Yep. So that's what I'd like to see more of.
Thank you, John. And I completely agree. I think that shift in language is really important, and you're targeting a different group, so we should be speaking to them in a different way. Fernando, from your perspective, how do you guide organizations through this shift in communication?
Yeah, something that is challenging. I think there's two big challenges for marketing, for the agencies as well. Is first, the way we do marketing today. We do marketing based on data and maybe very much focused on performance. So if we see really the data today, we maybe are targeting a man in a certain way that could be effective, but not positive. And that will, I can tell later, could have impacts in brand growth, because now we have the data. So this is the tricky part. We need to, in a world where marketing is a lot about performance, we need to move again back to qualitative and understanding, and not just understand where men are. We need to understand where men are going to, how we can help them get there and start building those spaces of aspirations there. So we help them not just to get there, but also make the journey aspirational. So it's not easy to go from performing to be comfortable to who you are. That requires an effort, an investment, but brands can say it's an effort that worth doing it. And there was example from the Macallan and whiskey and other brands that did such campaigns that are so powerful. The other challenge we have is this is not something we will learn on a PowerPoint. So John has their own journey. I had my own journey. It's something that to really grasp it, you need to embody it. So you need to invest in it as a person and as a professional. So I do therapy, I go to men's group, retreats, read a lot, chat, listen, talk about it with other genders. And this is how you learn. And all the time, I will learn about this all my life, because it's in parallel my professional and my personal journey that will never end. So these are things that are the challenges. It's like we need to revisit the way we do marketing to focus more on the person, but not today, but in the future. And we need to take this as a personal and professional journey.
Thank you. And those are really interesting points from both of you throughout all of this session. And before we head to the Q&A, I just want to get a one-liner of your key takeaway from each of you. John, shall we start with you?
Yeah, I think it's a real reality check. I think it's time for organization and brands to rethink and reset how they engage with men.
Brilliant. Thank you. Over to you, Fernando.
Yeah, and I think a point that I haven't said, I'm gonna add that this is not just relevant for brands that target primarily men. So this is important for brands that target men, unisex for sure, so they can grow equity and sales by doing that. But then, I don't know, 2 weeks ago for Menstrual Health Day, I went to SCT to discuss about periods, for example, and it was very rich. I learned a lot. I realized how little I knew and how little men know. So it's something that can really pay attention to it. It can really help any brand.
Amazing. Thank you both. So let's move on to the Q&A. If you have any questions for me, please pop them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer some of them. Okay, so we have a question so far. How much of this conversation is actually happening right now, whether it be in brands or outside of brands? Fernando, would you like to start answering this question?
Something. So I can't tell it. So I've been talking about this in 2013, as I said, no, maybe in crescendo, but by 2015 I was openly talking about it. And for many years, this was on the side. It wasn't mainstream. No? I was telling, look, we have a problem. If we don't start including men and boys in the discussion, as John said, not just D&I, for equality, and we leave them behind, we will have a problem. With time, the problem not get better, but gets certainly worse. The interesting thing is now became mainstream again. So through shows like Adolescence, I don't know if you've seen Gareth Southgate message, Kathleen Moran, including men in the world of the strong feminist movement. Now the UN talking about it. Now we know and we are aware that as society, in terms of brands, some brands of course, are entering there, but most of the brands that are targeting men, and some examples of unisex brands, maybe Persil is one I talk a lot, but it's still nascent. I think brands and marketeers has a lot of fear of backlash. They don't know exactly how to manage and prefer not to engage much still, but I think it's going to come because society is showing it.
Got a question for you here, John. When you say meet men where they're at, how sensitive are men really to the language that we use?
I mean, I think they're extremely sensitive to it, and I think the problem is they were ignored for so long that they're actually, I won't use bad language, but they're pretty fed up. And don't take me for granted, because I also have an opinion and I also can't. And even though that may sound like a weird emancipation for some people, I think it's a very necessary cry for help. To be honest with you, I think it's a warning shot over the bows, across the bows, that we need to take men seriously and their issues seriously. And and I think the language, you see how there's the simplicity of the language of the masculinity influences in the manosphere, but we also see it in politics, without trying to get political. But there's a reason why in many countries in Europe, I would say, when you see it, the people who are voting for extreme right parties, a large majority of those voters tend to be men. Why? Because they have found a very simple playbook, a very simple language. They put complex matters out there as, deceptively simple, and men are responding to that. So I think we have to, I'm not saying we have to go that direction, but what I'm saying is I think there are learnings to be had from that, And we've got it for the way some of these people are using language in order to attract men, maybe even to manipulate them. But we shouldn't forget that at all. I think we need to look at the obvious.
Absolutely. And time for a final few questions. What would you say to leaders in progressive spaces who don't feel that disconnected personally, but still want to create room for men in their audience or workplace who do?
Well, I would say, good for them if they don't feel that disconnected. Maybe they've worked a bit on themselves. Maybe they're doing fine. Thank you very much. But I mean, leadership is also about collective responsibility. And I think there's this thing. I love this old expression: elevate others around you while you climb yourself. So the conditions may be fine for you right now, but take a deeper look. If you want a better response in your workplace, if you want, all those things I was talking about, better performance, more innovation, less conflict, higher staff retention, take a serious look at what's really bugging people, what's missing, and don't think from your personal point of view that you have all the answers for everybody else, because you don't. You never do.
And I actually have one last question, maybe a bit controversial, but what brands are doing it wrong? This one might be one for you, Fernando. Don't know if you can call anyone out, but it's interesting to see because you can reflect quite well on those doing it right, but looking at those doing wrong and what not to do.
Yeah. I will focus more on what not to do. So calling out brands, I'm not. It's not my role. It's not a policeman. I tell you what is more the common threats when things don't go well. And brands that want to have a statement about what masculinity is, what men should be or shouldn't, that is wrong, and generate backlash. And because who are brands to do so? So brands should engage in talking through the emotional space they own to always use to connect with consumers and redefine that in a way that serves men for where they are and going to. So that is a mistake. And also is do maybe a narrow focus on targeting. So when I was working in other brands in the past, you said, okay, I want to talk to young men, and you think, okay, men 14 to 18, and you have a good idea of who they are. But today, you have so many targets within the target, so polarized for social media, that if you want to try to get one without seeing the overall, you can get the backlash from the other side if you make a statement. And you can tell, oh, this is the way we do marketing by targeting some people, and it doesn't matter if we annihilate the other. But there are other ways to do it. There are ways that you can integrate messages that are above them and the differences, and be integrated if you think more of what I said before, where men are going, what type of way you are representing them. No, in general, we talk about diversity from a gender angle, from the racial angle, for abilities angle, but we don't talk about the diversity of values. And maybe in that, you just need to show that the guy from Texas is as aspirational as the guy from California or South Africa or Argentina. Well, Argentina can be a little bit more aspirational, that's fine. But the rest, the rest should be similar. So those are the things. I think there are common threats that there are more than that, but that you shouldn't do. You are going to upset people more than engage.
Thanks, Fernando. And sorry for putting you on the spot there. But yeah, that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Really great discussion. So a huge thank you to you, John and Fernando, for being a part of this webinar, and to all of you for joining as well. I'll give you back 10 minutes of your lunch, but definitely keep the conversation going. It's such an important topic, and definitely doesn't end after this session. We'll share the recording on YouTube, probably post-can next week. And until then, thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your Friday. I hope you get to enjoy some sunshine. Thank
you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.